A man who cleaned in silence, honored our dead. You threw him out. Now you can sit in your own mess. The anonymous note sat on the superintendent's desk as trash overflowed and hallways reeked. 3 days earlier, they'd fired the school janitor for hanging a tattered flag above his closet. What they didn't know was whose flag it really was and how far students would go to defend it. Miguel Alvarez had been cleaning Lincoln High's hallways for 14 years. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., he'd unlock his supply closet and see the same thing. A faded American flag hanging above the doorframe, its edges worn thin from years of dust and time. Students rushed past it daily without a glance. To them, Miguel was invisible, just the guy who mopped their spills and emptied their trash. They didn't know he'd been a machinist before this job. Didn't know he had a degree in engineering from a community college in El Paso. Didn't know he'd taken this work because it was steady, and steady was what you needed when you were raising a son alone. Most of all, they didn't know what that flag really meant. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning when District Supervisor Janet Morrison arrived for her quarterly inspection. She was efficiency in a pantsuit, clipboard ready, measuring tape in hand, looking for violations and budget cuts. She'd been touring the building for 20 minutes when she stopped dead at Miguel's closet. "What is this?" she asked, pointing at the flag. Miguel looked up from organizing his cleaning supplies. "It's just a flag, ma'am." "It's unprofessional," she said. "Tattered. This is an educational institution, not someone's garage." She made a sharp note on her clipboard. "Personal decorations in work areas violate District Policy 347B. Remove it immediately." Miguel's hands tightened around the spray bottle he was holding. "Ma'am, that flag has been there for... I don't care how long it's been there. It's coming down today, or you're coming down with it." She clicked away on her heels, leaving Miguel staring at the flag that had watched over him through every shift, every late night, every quiet moment, when grief threatened to swallow him whole. 17-year-old Mason Torres noticed something was wrong that afternoon. He'd always been observant. Losing your mother to cancer when you're 14 does that to a person. Makes you notice the small things others miss. The flag was gone. Mason had passed. Miguel's closet twice daily for 3 years. He'd never really looked at the flag before, but now its absence felt like a missing tooth. Something essential was gone from the hallway's landscape. He found Miguel in the East Wing, pushing his cart with slower steps than usual. "Mr. Alvarez, what happened to your flag?" Miguel's shoulders sagged. He looked older somehow, defeated. "New supervisor said it had to go, against the rules." There was pain in his voice that Mason recognized, the same hollow tone his dad had used when talking about his mom's final days. "Why was it important to you?" Miguel stopped pushing the cart. For a moment, Mason thought he wouldn't answer. Then, so quietly, Mason almost missed it, he said, "It was my son's." That evening, Mason couldn't focus on homework. Something about Miguel's expression kept haunting him, the way his voice had cracked when he mentioned his son. The next morning, Mason arrived early. The building was nearly empty, just the custodial staff preparing for another day. He walked to Miguel's closet and tried the handle, unlocked. Inside, among the industrial cleaners and spare paper towels, Mason found it. The flag, folded in a perfect military triangle, sat atop a metal shelf, like a sacred relic. Next to it was a framed photograph that made Mason's breath catch. A young Marine in dress blues standing at attention beside a flag-draped coffin. The nameplate read, Corporal Carlos Miguel Alvarez, 1987 to 2009, Helmand Province, Afghanistan. In the background of the photo, barely visible, stood Miguel, 20 years younger, but with the same gentle eyes, now filled with unbearable grief. Mason's throat tightened. His mother's flag sat folded in their living room the same way. He knew what this meant. Knew why Miguel had needed it above his workspace. "What are you doing in there?" Mason spun around. Morrison stood in the doorway, arms crossed, expression sharp. "I was just looking for, this is a restricted area. Get to class immediately." As Mason hurried away, he heard Morrison on her phone. "Security breach. Emotional attachment to workplace. Recommend immediate disciplinary action." By lunch, the rumors were spreading like wildfire. Miguel Alvarez had been fired. Something about policy violations and insubordination. Most students barely reacted. Custodians came and went all the time in their minds, but Mason couldn't let it go. He found Miguel in the parking lot, loading his personal items into an old pickup truck. The man who'd maintained their school with quiet dignity for 14 years was reduced to carrying his belongings in a cardboard box. "Mr. Alvarez, wait." Miguel looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Miguel's composure finally broke. "He was going to teach history," Miguel said, his voice cracking. "Carlos, he said he wanted kids to understand why people serve, what it really costs." Tears rolled down his weathered cheeks. "He had applications ready for when he got back. Was going to substitute, teach here first, then get his credential." Miguel gestured helplessly at the school building behind them. Now I'm just the janitor nobody sees, and he's gone, and none of it mattered." Mason felt his own throat tighten. "It mattered to me. It matters to a lot of people." "Does it?" Miguel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Then why am I standing here with my life in a box?" That night, Mason sat in his bedroom staring at his mother's memorial flag, the one they'd given his father at her military funeral. She'd been a Navy medic before becoming a nurse, the triangle of fabric that represented everything they'd lost when the cancer finally won. Miguel had lost his son, his only child, and now he'd lost his job for trying to honor that memory. Mason pulled out his phone and started texting. The next morning, he walked into Lincoln High carrying his mother's folded flag. His first period teacher, Mrs. Patterson, noticed immediately. "Mason, what's that for?" "It's my mom's," Mason said simply. "She died serving others." Word spread through the school like electricity. By second period, Sarah Chin had brought a photo of her grandfather, a Korean War veteran. By third, Danny Walsh was carrying his uncle's Purple Heart. He died in a training accident at Camp Pendleton. They weren't organizing anything formal. They were just quietly carrying pieces of their family's service, honoring the connections Morrison had tried to sever. But Miguel Alvarez had no idea what was building. He'd spent the morning at the unemployment office, filling out paperwork with shaking hands. 14 years of steady work gone because he wouldn't dishonor his son's memory. At 61, who would hire him now? Meanwhile, back at Lincoln High, something extraordinary was taking shape. By Friday, over 50 students were carrying military memorabilia. Emma Martinez had her brother's dog tags. Kevin Washington brought his father's Vietnam service medals. Lisa Johnson carried a photo of her cousin who died in Iraq. They weren't making speeches or holding rallies. They were just there, quietly present, carrying their grief and pride together. Then Mason made a decision that would change everything. Monday morning at 11 a.m., he stood up in AP history class. "Where are you going, Mr. Torres?" his teacher asked. "To remember someone who deserved better," Mason said. He walked out carrying his mother's flag. Within minutes, others followed. They formed a line outside the school's main entrance, then began walking the perimeter. 50 students became 100, then 200, then 300 teenagers standing shoulder to shoulder around the entire school building, each holding flags, photos, medals, and memories. They called it a human chain of honor. No chanting, no shouting, just silent dignity that spoke louder than any protest ever could. Local news crews arrived within hours. Parents came to support their children. Veterans from the VFW post showed up in uniform, adding their own silent presence to the demonstration. But the most powerful moment came when the janitors from other schools started arriving. They'd heard what happened to Miguel Alvarez, how he'd been fired for honoring his fallen son, how the district had chosen policy over compassion. First came the crew from Roosevelt Middle School, then Lincoln Elementary. By 2 p.m., maintenance workers from across the district had formed their own line of solidarity. They weren't loud or disruptive. They were just there, standing with the students, refusing to let one of their own be forgotten. Inside the school, chaos was building. Trash cans overflowed. Spills went unmopped. Restrooms ran out of supplies. The hallways that Miguel had kept spotless for 14 years were falling apart in his absence. Principal Henderson found himself wading through the mess, trying to maintain order with a skeleton crew of administrators who'd never operated a mop in their lives. That afternoon, Superintendent Williams arrived at her office to find complete pandemonium. Her secretary was gone. She joined the custodians outside. Her coffee hadn't been made. Her usual after-lunch floor cleaning had been skipped. On her desk sat a manila envelope with her name written in careful script. Inside, a single sheet of paper with typed words that would haunt her for years. "A man who cleaned in silence, honored our dead. You threw him out. Now you can sit in your own mess." The note was unsigned, but at the bottom someone had drawn a small triangle, the unmistakable shape of a folded flag. Williams stared at the message, then looked out her window at the sea of students still surrounding the school. For the first time in her career, she realized she might have made a mistake that couldn't be undone with policy memos and disciplinary action. By Tuesday, the story had gone viral. Justice for Miguel started trending on social media. News crews from 3 states descended on Lincoln High. Students gave interviews about respect and remembrance, about the quiet man who'd cleaned their school and honored his fallen son. The most powerful moment came when a reporter asked Mason why he'd started the protest. "Because Mr. Alvarez shouldn't have to carry his grief alone," Mason said, his mother's flag folded carefully in his hands. "None of us should." The clip was shared millions of times within hours. Wednesday brought more chaos. The health department threatened to close the school due to unsanitary conditions. Parents demanded action. The school board called an emergency meeting, but Miguel remained completely unaware of the storm swirling around his name. He sat in his small apartment, staring at Carlos's photograph on the kitchen table, the same one from his funeral, his son's face, forever frozen at 22. The silence was deafening after 14 years of school bells and teenage chatter. He turned off his phone after the third call from unknown numbers. Probably bill collectors. He figured the rent was due in 2 weeks and unemployment wouldn't cover it. Maybe he could find work somewhere else. Maybe someone would hire a 61-year-old man whose only crime was loving his dead son too much. Outside his window, the world was talking about Miguel Alvarez. His story was spreading across the internet, shared by millions who understood loss, who recognized the quiet dignity of a father's love. But inside his apartment, Miguel knew none of this. He was just a grieving man, wondering how he'd failed so completely at honoring the person who'd mattered most. Then his doorbell rang. Mason stood on the porch, still holding his mother's flag. Behind him were dozens of other students, all carrying their own pieces of military history. "Mr. Alvarez," Mason said, "we think it's time you came back to school." Thursday morning brought the emergency assembly. Nobody wanted to miss it. Everyone needed to be there. The entire student body packed into the gymnasium, along with parents, community members, and a significant portion of the local media. Superintendent Williams took the podium, flanked by school board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. But before Williams could speak, Mason stood up in the bleachers. "We want Mr. Alvarez back," he said simply. The gym erupted. Students rose to their feet, holding flags and photographs and medals. The applause was deafening, sustained, overwhelming. Williams waited for quiet, then nodded toward the gym entrance. Miguel Alvarez walked in, wearing his custodial uniform, carrying the folded flag that had started everything. The applause died instantly. You could hear people breathing. Miguel approached the microphone with uncertain steps. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the flag, holding it so everyone could see the faded stripes and worn stars. "This flag covered my son's coffin," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying to every corner of the gym. "Carlos wanted to be a teacher after the Marines. He said he wanted to help kids learn about the world." Miguel's eyes found Mason in the crowd. "He never got that chance. But every day I worked in these halls, I felt like he was teaching anyway. Through me, through the respect I tried to show every student who passed by." He refolded the flag with military precision, then looked directly at Superintendent Williams. "This young man and his friends understand something we adults forgot. That honoring the dead isn't about following rules. It's about keeping love alive in small, quiet ways." The gymnasium was completely silent. Then Mason started clapping slowly. Others joined in. The applause built and built until it seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Williams took the microphone back, her voice thick with emotion. "Mr. Alvarez, the school board has voted unanimously to reverse your termination immediately." She paused, looking at the sea of flags in the crowd. "We're offering you full reinstatement with back pay, a significant raise in recognition of your years of dedicated service, and expanded benefits, including full health care coverage." The crowd erupted again, but Williams held up her hand. "More than that, we want to work with you to create a proper memorial for Carlos and all our fallen heroes. Would you please come back to work? This school needs you." Miguel nodded, tears streaming down his face as the gymnasium exploded in cheers that seemed to go on forever. 6 weeks later, visitors to Lincoln High noticed something special in the main lobby. A glass display case containing a folded American flag, a photograph of Marine Corporal Carlos Miguel Alvarez, and a bronze plaque reading, "In honor of all who served and all who remember them with love." But it was what Miguel placed beside the flag that made everyone understand the full weight of what had been lost and found again. Carlos's college application, creased, from years of folding and unfolding. His essay about wanting to teach history to help students understand sacrifice and service. His letter to the district requesting substitute teacher positions. Miguel had carried these documents in his wallet for 15 years, taking them out sometimes during quiet moments in his closet, imagining the conversations he and Carlos would have had about the students, the lessons, the difference they could have made together. Now they sat in the display case, testament to dreams interrupted, but not forgotten. Every Memorial Day, the case fills with flags, photos, letters, and flowers left by students. The display gets carefully archived each year, making room for new tributes to service and sacrifice. But one addition appeared just days after the memorial was installed. A handwritten note in teenage handwriting, unsigned, but placed carefully next to Carlos's teaching application. Carlos did teach us. Through you. Through your love for him. Through showing us what it means to honor someone quietly every single day. Thank you for being the teacher you didn't know you were. Miguel found the note during his evening rounds. He stood there for a long time, reading it over and over, understanding finally that his son's dream of teaching had come true after all, just not in the way either of them had imagined. Miguel still works at Lincoln High, still arrives at 5:30 a.m., still mops the halls and empties the trash cans. But now, his paycheck reflects the respect he had always deserved, and his health coverage ensures he can take care of himself the way he'd always taken care of others. More importantly, when students pass the lobby display, they pause, they look, they remember that behind every quiet person is a story worth knowing, a love worth honoring. And sometimes, if you're paying attention during his rounds, you'll see Miguel stop by the display case. He'll touch the glass gently where Carlos's photo sits next to his teaching dreams, whisper something only he and Carlos can hear, then continue down the hallway where his son's memory now watches over every student who passes by.